Hello and welcome to Marker Development Video 1, Getting Started with Marking. I'm Theron Muller, a distance staff member based in Japan, and I've been working with Dan Malt, who's based in Birmingham, on putting together some videos that go over some of the basics of marking. What I want to do in this first of 5-ish videos is share who these videos are intended for, get into some of the nuts and bolts of doing marking, and then in the last couple minutes, I want to preview the contents of the upcoming videos. So first, regarding who these videos are for, these are primarily intended for new markers, including dissertation supervisors, because it's very likely that the first things distance staff are expected to mark for Birmingham are the dissertations of their students, because they agree to supervise the dissertation, and then the student submits that dissertation to the university, and the supervisors are asked to be first markers for dissertations. But we also hope that these videos will have some information for old hands at marking who are interested in thinking about and reflecting on the marking that they do. I think it's worth saying here that we're not intending for these videos to be authoritarian. We're not intending to dictate how people go about doing their marking, but we do feel that it's worth giving some guidance regarding better practices in order to encourage and improve, in order to encourage high quality feedback on the programs, and then to encourage further improvement in people's marking comments. So with that, I'll go on to getting started, some of the nuts and bolts of marking. If you're marking essays, you should receive at least 3 files if you're just marking one essay. One file that you receive will be the student's essay, which you see on the right, and then the other file you receive will be a blank mark sheet, which you see on the left, and then the third of the files that you should receive will be a first marker list and feedback form, which you should see on the screen here. So within this first video, the nuts and bolts of marking, I'm going to talk about how to go from the blank files that you receive to a completed marking file, which you should see on the right side of your screen. So how to go from the file on the left, which is blank, to the file on the right, which is completed. And then also the first marker list and feedback form. If you don't receive this, you'll want to contact the administrator in Birmingham and ask them to send you a copy of this, because this is important for you to see the second marks, the marks that are actually assigned at the University of Birmingham by the moderators. So what you do is you fill in the student ID information, the first mark that you've assigned, any notes for the moderator, and then the moderator should be filling in the mark that was actually assigned to the student. And even though I've been marking now for about 3 or 4 years, I find it's really useful to get this form back from the university, because it lets me know if my marks are crawling in one direction. So perhaps if I'm starting to be a bit too critical of students' essays, the marks might be drifting downward a little bit, and I can notice that the second markers in cells, the moderators at the university, are pushing my marks up, and then I can know from the next round of marking that I need to be a bit more careful with the marks that I assign. After you send your completed marking back to Birmingham, it should take about a month, and then this file should come back to you with the second marks, the moderator's marks, and then any feedback that they might have for you. If you're not getting this file back, please contact the administrator at Birmingham to follow up on that, because this is something that you should be getting as a marker. So when I receive the essays from the students and the blank mark sheet, one important thing that you need to do is to actually name the file. So the file is often the student's name and the module number. I'm sorry, not the student's name. The file is often the student's ID number and then the module number, and you should be getting files from Birmingham that have the student's ID number and the module number. So what I often do is I'll copy the file name from the PDF, and then I'll rename the blank mark sheet with the name of the file that it should have for the finalized marking, which should be the student number and then followed by a module number. And then I'll save that, and then I'm working with a new file, and that means that the mark sheet's still blank for the next time that I start. And when I do marking, I always start with a blank mark sheet. The first things I fill in are the initial table in the form down to the first marker name, and of course I leave the percentage blank, and then I skip the general comments and I scroll down to the specific comments. And the first thing that I'll type is here, the front matter, and the front matter I comment on everything in the essay that happens before the introduction. And I'll be producing future videos that talk about the contents of the specific comments and the contents of the general comments. And so I'm not going to discuss very much today about what you should be writing in the specific comments, except to say that you're expected to produce some feedback for every substantive section of the student's essay. And so you'll notice here I've got section 1 and some comments, section 2 and some comments, and then the student embeds the sections pretty deeply here, 2.2.1, and you'll notice that I've consolidated those two sections into one. And one of the motivations for doing that is because the minimum amount of feedback we're expected to give as markers is 2 pages, and if you look at the blank form that we get for marking, it's already pretty close to 2 pages. So it's pretty easy to write 2 pages of feedback for a student, and then the maximum amount that we're expected to give is 4 pages. And if you notice on my marking, if we go down here, my comments finish on the 4th page, and then there's some extra information about grading that I don't consider to be part of my marking. So if this scrolls over onto the 5th page, that doesn't bother me very much. My own personal philosophy is to try to give more feedback as opposed to less feedback, particularly for essays that are marginal, because one of the strengths that students have noted in the Birmingham program is the quality of feedback they get through marking, and also because this is the major feedback that students get from the university regarding their progress on the course. So I feel that it's important to give them as much support as I can in order to encourage them to be as successful as possible in their studies. But if I comment on every single section in the essay, either my comments won't be substantive enough to give them practical feedback, or I'll be going 6, 7, 8 pages into my feedback, and so that's why at certain points I consolidate sections. Don't feel that you need to comment on subsections. You can comment on one section at a time, although that's a value decision that I would encourage you to make yourself after you've gotten some marking experience. You'll notice that as you get down toward the bottom of the essay, the student finishes with the conclusion here in 7, and then after that I've also included some simple comments on the reference list. And if you scroll to the bottom of the essay here, there isn't an appendix, but if there are appendices, you're encouraged to also include brief comments about the appendices. Often I'll put something like, your appendix reproduces the questionnaire that you administered to your students, which is a welcome inclusion in your essay. And the reason the university encourages you to do that is that shows the student that you've read their entire manuscript. If they have 3 or 4 appendices, but you don't comment on the appendices at all, then some students will question whether you've read the entire essay or not. One reason that I don't comment extensively on appendices is because they don't count against the student's word count. And so I don't feel that I need to give substantive comments on the appendices. Oftentimes, if there's very few tables in the text and then there's several appendices included, I'll clump the appendices together and I'll say it's unfortunate that you didn't include some of this information in the body of your essay, where it would have served your essay better. But I'll probably get into a bit more detail about that when I talk about giving feedback on specific comments. And so after having read the essay and commented on each section as I read it, then with the essay fresh in my mind, I comment on some key points to bear in mind for the student's next piece of work. And these are expected to be about 3 to 5 points of advice for the student. And I'll go into writing those in another future video, hopefully. And then once the specific comments are done, I come back up and then I will decide on a percentage for the essay, and then I'll write some general comments. And the general comments aren't expected to go over 1 page, so these are expected to finish at the first page. And what I find here is often I write too much, and then I go back and I end up having to take out things that aren't as important. I have to kind of prioritize what information is important to include here, because I tend to go over 1 page when I'm writing comments for the students here. I've talked to markers before who first read the student's essay and then started doing the specific comments and the general comments for the student. But I find that particularly because we're paid per essay, I feel that as I'm reading the essay, I have to be doing something in order to ensure that I'm using my time efficiently. Which is why, as I read through the essay, I make comments on each specific section. Of course, if I say something like, it appears you've missed this issue, and then later on they have it in the essay, I will go back and I will correct the comments that I write section by section. And oftentimes it's something like, it's information that has been misplaced. So even though it's occurring later in the essay, it would have been more appropriate earlier in the essay. So when I go back and I edit it, I can say, it's unfortunate that you didn't include that information here, because as a reader, I would expect for it to be included here. But as I've mentioned, I think 3 or 4 times already, I'll be doing another video on the specific comments section. So hopefully I can deal with some of that advice then. And for those of you marking dissertations, sorry, I forgot to open the dissertation mark sheet before I started the video. I'm just opening it here. There we go. So for those of you who are marking dissertations, you get a very similar looking form. And it's pretty easy to fill in the first bits of information on the front of the form. And then here what I do is, usually I'm familiar with the student's dissertation because I've been instrumental in guiding its writing over time. Sometimes you'll have students who didn't consult you really carefully with the dissertation, and so that section's more, this part of the essay, this part of the assessment is more difficult to write. If I'm familiar with the dissertation, I'll fill this information in quickly right as I start, about an abstract length, somewhere between 250 and 500 words. And then I skip the assessment of methodology, etc., 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 and I go down to the assessment of organization and presentation of the dissertation. And here what I'll do is I'll write about a paragraph for each chapter in the dissertation, so that if you have something like an 8-chapter dissertation, I'll end up with 2 or 3 pages of feedback on the contents of the dissertation in this section. So as I'm reading through the dissertation, I'm also commenting on each of the chapters in the dissertation. And again, I find that's an efficient use of my time. That way, when I finish reading the dissertation, I've got part of the form also completed. And then once I've finished reading the dissertation, I go back up and then I fill in this assessment information and I make a decision on the mark for the dissertation. So if you're a dissertation supervisor and you're getting started with that, I think that the approach isn't too different from doing marking of essays, although I tend not to give kind of deep-leveled comments. So here you'll notice that I'm commenting on specific subsections. Rather than do that, I kind of give general comments on each chapter in the dissertation. And the reason for doing that, again, is that I don't want to create too much work for myself in writing too much in terms of comments for the students. But I do want to give them fair coverage in terms of feedback on the contents of the dissertation. Okay, so looking ahead to future videos, this video is hopefully complete, the nuts and bolts of marking. And then in the next couple videos, I'll be going over some specific marker feedback and discussing how to perhaps improve that feedback a little bit in order to be sensitive to the student's perspective while also being constructively critical. And I'll be going through specific sections of the marking and talking about contents there, what to write there, and how to go about making that sensitive and also addressing any potential issues that come up in the student's essay. And we're also considering a video on the topic of marker tone. And then I think that, like I said, we're planning on 5-ish videos, and we've only got 4 planned here. So if you have your own request or your own idea for a topic that you'd like to see covered in these videos, please feel free to get in touch with either Dan or I. You should see our email addresses on the screen, and hopefully you'll be watching this video in a place where it's fairly easy to get in touch with one of us. And let us know what you'd like to see, and we'd be happy to try to accommodate you. Thank you very much for watching.